I think most of us grow up and have kids and believe that a good parent sees a problem, sees your kid is suffering or struggling or whatever, and we figure out a way to fix it. That's what a good parent does. And so when my kids started struggling, I was like, okay, let's do this. We'll get a therapist, we'll get a doctor, we'll get this, we'll get that. I really sort of convinced myself that I had more control than I did. And what I realized is convincing myself I had control is what caused so much self-abuse. Because if you think you can control something, then when things don't turn out well, it's all your fault, right? Because you were supposed to know how to control it.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. As parents, we want more than anything to help our kids thrive, to protect them from pain and harm, and avoid some of, or maybe all, of the mistakes we made in our own lives. But what happens when our kids are struggling with really big, difficult, scary, maybe even life-threatening stuff, and none of our efforts to fix things are making a difference? That's the focus of today's show, and I am absolutely thrilled to be in conversation about it with Kristina Kuzmic, a mental health advocate, author, comedian, and self-described cheerleader for her fellow humans. Kristina has just come out with a powerful new book, I Can Fix This and Other Lies I've Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child, in which she writes about her complex journey of parenting a child struggling with mental health and substance abuse. She wrote it to help other struggling parents reject ideas that keep families stuck, and with her trademark authenticity and wisdom, dispel the lies we believe as parents. This is such a raw, deep, and generous conversation. It is exactly the conversation a parent feeling hopeless and overwhelmed and figuring out how to help their child needs to hear. Truly balm for the soul. And if you're not familiar with Kristina's work, here's a little bit more about her. Kristina immigrated to the U.S. from Croatia during the war in her homeland. After later facing more challenges, divorce, single parenting, poverty, mental health challenges, Kristina's goal became clear: to be for others what she needed when she was at her lowest. In 2011, Oprah crowned Kristina the winner of Mark Burnett's reality TV competition, Oprah's Search for the Next TV Star. Since working with Oprah, Kristina has branched out on her own, creating videos and juggling all of life's challenges and encouraging her audience to prioritize their mental health. She's quickly become a viral sensation with nearly 3 million Facebook followers, over 670,000 Instagram followers, and more than 1 billion video views. In addition to the book we're talking about today, she's also the author of Hold On, But Don't Hold Still. And one last thing, before we begin this episode, a quick content warning. This episode contains mention of suicidal ideation, self-harm, and mental health struggles. So if these are challenging topics for you to hear about, please do what you need to do to prioritize your well-being. And now here is my conversation with Kristina. Hey, Kristina, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm so looking forward to this conversation. I loved your book and I want to get into all the concepts. But before we do that, there might be listeners who aren't familiar with you in the world. You have a big presence in the world and a huge social media following as well. So I know listeners will be very excited to hear from you. But I would love if you could take us a little bit inside your personal story of how you found yourself doing the pivot, because you were writing and speaking and having this big presence about the highs and lows of what you call your seriously flawed life, which is so relatable and so focused on you. And now you've kind of pivoted in this current focus, which is using that same authentic, humorous, personal approach, but to talk about what's happening in your family life and specifically what happened with your son, Luke. So could you talk about that pivot, that shift in direction that you made and why that happened?
Sure. So I started making videos years ago, really never thought it would be a career, because I wanted to be for others what I needed when I was at my lowest. And that sort of became like a mission statement to me. And years ago, I was divorced with 2 little kids. I was on food stamps. I was struggling and I really hated myself. And so I just started making videos that I needed at the time. You know, I needed other mothers to be honest about how hard motherhood can be and how hard life can be, and that it's okay that we make mistakes and we're not perfect. And then my son started struggling. And I have this rule with my family. I will never share anything about them, not even a family photo, unless everybody's approved. So I never thought that I would share this part publicly because my son's always been a private person. And so I continue making these videos to make others laugh. And, they were helpful and therapeutic to me also. But behind the scenes, we're dealing with a kid who is suicidal and I'm feeling clueless. And then eventually he said, Mom, I think I should do a video with you. This isn't something I want to do regularly, but I just feel like it helped me to hear from other teens. So maybe if I speak publicly, it'll help another teen who feels alone, because kids are always hearing from adults in their life, right? Parents, doctors, teachers. And so we made this video, and that's what led to the book. And he gave me his input all along the way. And my son even actually wrote the last chapter. But what's interesting about that is that without me even realizing it at the time, it continued sort of my mission statement of I want to be for others what I needed when I was at my lowest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I was so struck by, because certainly the space that I'm in and the families I talk with, you're talking about something that so many families are experiencing, but most families feel so alone in it. Because of privacy issues, they feel like they can't talk to many people about what's going on. There's stigma, there's fear, there's shame, there's all of those things. And then that further isolates us, which is why this to me felt like such a gift that you're able to share this with people, because you're tackling things I think so many people just are not talking about. And it is really heavy, devastating stuff to go through.
Yeah. I mean, it's a few, weeks or months after I signed the contract with my publisher, I was ready to quit because I was in that mindset of like, we're finally in a little bit of a better place. Why am I now forcing myself to go back and relive this? I mean, even that just felt so traumatic. But what you just mentioned, the fact that people don't talk about it openly, the fact that there is still shame, that's the stuff that really kept me going. And even in my son's chapter, he addresses that. And one thing I've noticed, so I'm on tour now, and I talk very openly in my show about mental health. And at the meet and greets after, almost every person that approaches me has a story. They've been struggling. Their child was struggling, their spouse, and not just little struggles. We're talking serious, suicidal ideation, serious stuff. And that's my one goal. And I would say my son's also with this book is, let's just talk about it openly. I truly believe that shame is what is destroying so many families and what is killing so many of our children. We have to get rid of the shame.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Could you tell us a little bit before we get more into the story as well about the timeline? Because the fact that Luke was such a willing participant of this, I think makes it so powerful. And it's so helpful to hear his perspective because he can share very honestly and candidly about what he was experiencing. And that's such incredible insight. So how long ago did this all happen and where are you today in that healing process?
I mean, he was 13 when I noticed changes, but I, instead of coming from a place of curiosity, came from a place of assumption. Probably one of my first mistakes was like, teenage hormones. I know how to deal with this. And then at 14, when he was 14, was the first time he admitted that he had thought about hurting himself. So this was, he's turning 21 this summer. So this is like 6, almost 7 years ago.
Your book is, how would you define it? I think it was like a prescriptive memoir because it's really your story, but it has really practical takeaways in the way that you've structured it. How would you classify it?
I mean, really, for me, I just wanted to share a story in a really blunt way and not sugarcoat anything. And in fact, there were so many things that anybody that reads it will know. They'll be like, oh my gosh, did she have his permission to write this? Every single time I asked him, like, hey, should I not include this story? Because his depression often showed up as anger and rage. And he did a lot of things that parents might be shocked by. And every time I asked him, he said, no, write it. Because if we're going to do our story, let's do it honestly. And so I just thought of it that way. And the one thing I really didn't want, and I hope no reader feels, I didn't want to come from a place of like, I have it figured out. Here's all my advice. Because I'm still learning. I will never have it all figured out. And so I purposely wrote it in, I don't use any you, like you, the reader, should try this. I purposely wrote it all sort of almost like I was writing a diary.
Yeah, that's great. And it comes off that way, really feels very personal. And I want listeners to read your full story. But you said, at 13, you started realizing what was going on in terms of the suicidal ideation. Could you kind of give us just the overview of the story that you guys went through together? Because it got very intense and was a lot for all of you to navigate as a family.
Yeah. So when I found out that he had had a lot of suicidal thoughts and that obviously it was a lot more serious than I even realized, we got him a therapist and took him to a psychiatrist and all that stuff. And, the antidepressant wasn't a quick magical fix and therapy wasn't a quick magical fix. So he decided to start numbing with drugs and alcohol, really mostly drugs, and stealing pain pills from people and stealing money from us and other people in order to be able to buy things, buy drugs. And again, like I mentioned earlier, his depression often showed up as anger. So he was punching holes in the wall. His self-harm usually was punching tiles. His knuckles were always bloody. It was just very chaotic. He would scream awful things. I felt like I was emotionally abused for a few years. I mean, it was just really intense. And at one point I had to call the police on him. And that was sort of a moment in my life where I was like, wow, this was something nobody could have prepared me for. You have a little baby and no one's like, hey, someday you're going to be calling the police on your child. And they took him in for a psychiatric hold. He ended up in a psychiatric hospital and later a residential center, a treatment center. And then again, a few years later, back to a residential treatment center. So it was just like years of up and down. And I write in the book how, oh my goodness, here it is. Like, here's the new answer. And I get my hopes up and things would look good for a few days. And then it would be awful again. And I think a lot of parents with kids who are struggling can relate to that. You get your hopes up and I'm getting teary. I just talk about it, but things get better and you're like, yes, 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 we're finally, at a turning point. And then all of a sudden we're back. It feels like we're back at the beginning. Everybody was like, setbacks are normal. Setbacks are normal. I was like, okay, to me, setback is, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I felt like we were speeding in reverse with fail brakes all the time. So that's the very cliff note, very general summary of what we went through. But then eventually through a lot of support groups, but also a lot of me just working on me, on myself, because all my focus was like, he's the problem, or I don't even want to say problem. He's the one that has this issue and we need to fix it. And going, wait, what unhealed parts of myself am I bringing into this? And how is this affecting the relationship? That's when things really started to shift for us.
Yeah, it's so powerful. And I can feel that kind of emotional roller coaster of you think things are better. And, I've experienced in my life that whiplash that almost like, is it okay to trust that things are getting better and like to let your nervous system calm down and then something happens and then you're kicked right back there so quickly. And then that hypervigilance is exhausting. It's incredibly stressful and the stakes are so high.
Yeah. When you say hypervigilance, how when you have a newborn baby and they're just so still when they're sleeping. And so at least I did. I know a lot of my friends we would put our face close to our baby's sleeping face just to feel their breath, to make sure they were still breathing and okay. I used to go into my son's bedroom multiple times during the night when he was 15, 16, 17. And I would put my face close to make sure that he was still breathing. So it was all consuming. It was all day, all night. My mission was, how do we not just keep him alive? How do we make him want to live? How do we make him realize that he can have a good life?
It's so powerful. And I just appreciate you sharing this. It's what I know so many people are experiencing. And to hear someone talk about it openly makes everybody feel less alone in this. I want to get into your book. We're going to take a quick break and then we'll talk more about your brand new book, I Can Fix This. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Synbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Synbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Synbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Synbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Synbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. So one question I wanted to ask before we get into your book is, just as you were describing what you're going through and, in those really, really challenging years, who were you turning to? In your book, you're kind of talking about some of the things that you navigated, but what was it ultimately that helped you get through that most difficult time?
I mean, I have incredible friends. I write in the book how one time Luca ran away from home, and it was during the time where he was suicidal and he was stealing, and he was even threatening to be violent. So he runs away, and I'm thinking the worst. And my friend, who has 4 children of her own and a very busy life, showed up. Oh my gosh, I could cry. She showed up to my house. I didn't even ask her to show up. She got my text that if you hear anything from Luca, please let me know. He ran away. She showed up. It was probably midnight. And she said, I'm just going to sit with you. We don't have to talk. I'm just going to sit with you. And it was the most beautiful thing I think a friend can do. By the way, if anybody's listening, they're like, how do I support my friend? She didn't try to make me feel better. She didn't try to give me some hope, because that doesn't work when you're panicked. She just sat with me while I cried. So I had a lot of really wonderful supportive friends. I was going to support groups, which I highly recommend for everyone. Please find a support group, whether it's online or in person. And if there isn't one, try to start one. I know you're already overwhelmed and busy, but support groups were life-changing both for me and for my son. And we were in family therapy. But here's the thing. After Luca started to get better, that's when I felt like I actually got worse. And I was like, what is going on? He's better. This is good. And what I realized is I had PTSD. I had witnessed way too many scary things. And all those, the support groups and group therapy, that was all great. But the way I compare it is kind of like when you sort of clean your house just enough so you can live in it, but there's still so much deep cleaning and there's so many drawers to go through. And I never did that. I just took care of myself enough so that I could function. And so after it got better is when I went into individual therapy and just really, again, opened those drawers and dug through all that stuff that needed to be dealt with and organized. And so that's one thing I would recommend to anybody, even if you are in amazing support groups and you're in family therapy with your child and you have amazing friends, please, 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 if you can do it, get your own individual therapy. You need it even when you're doing okay.
I so appreciate that reminder. And I think it is something so many people don't do, especially when they're in the trenches with kids who are struggling. Not only does all the energy go there, but that idea that when our kids then get better, we have all this unresolved stuff. And I mean, you can power through it, but it's not good for you. It's not good for your health. It's not good for your longevity, your well-being. I mean, this, again, hypervigilance takes a real toll, and the trauma experience takes a real toll if you don't deal with it. So thanks for that reminder.
I always tell parents, if you don't have enough will or whatever to do it for yourself, right? Because you're so focused on your kid, then do it as a gift to them. Because what happened with me is my son started to get better, but I wasn't better. So I'm approaching every conversation with him with fear. And every time he does anything that, in my definition of normal and healthy, my definition, not the real definition, but whatever I decide in that moment feels normal and healthy to me, isn't happening, I am freaking out. And even if I'm not saying anything to him freaking out, our kids sense our energy. And so if you're like, no, I don't want to take time out for myself, which, by the way, every parent should. But if you're not there yet in your journey, do it as a gift to your child. One of the things my son actually wrote in his chapter is that it was really not helpful to him when I came from a place of fear. And I knew that on my own level, I figured that out, but I didn't realize that he had even figured that out and sensed it. And it's true, because every time I came from a place of fear and operate from a place of fear, I was giving the world and Luca the worst version of myself. You cannot give your best version to anybody, or your healthiest version, or be the best support system when you're coming from a place of fear. By the way, that's so hard not to do when your child is struggling. My goodness.
Yeah, I just wrote down that's Jedi level stuff right there. Like, it's really, really challenging to do, but so important. I just want to talk about all the things, but I do want to talk about your book. So your book is called I Can Fix This and Other Lies I Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child. And I loved the structure of your book. Each chapter is a lie that you told yourself or that you believed, and that really kind of kept your family stuck while you were believing it. So I'd love to know a little bit more about why you structured the book in this way, even from a writing perspective. Like, how did that come to you, and why did that make sense to unfold it that way?
I think most of us grow up and have kids and believe that a good parent sees a problem, sees your kid is suffering or struggling or whatever, and we figure out a way to fix it. That's what a good parent does. And so when my kids started struggling, I was like, okay, let's do this. We'll get a therapist, we'll get a doctor, we'll get this, we'll get that. I really sort of convinced myself that I had more control than I did. And what I realized is convincing myself I had control is what caused so much self-abuse. Because if you think you can control something, then when things don't turn out well, it's all your fault, right? Because you were supposed to know how to control it. Throughout the journey, I had to realize, wow, there are a lot of lies that I'm believing. I can control it. I can fix it. Good mothers are selfless was a big one. I just need to pour all of me into him, and I'll be happy when he's happy. I'll enjoy my life. So many things that I address in the book. I sort of structured the book in a way that felt most authentic to me. And now, since then, a lot of people that have been able to read it can relate to it, because I think it's probably relatable to every parent, whatever, even if your story is completely different than ours. We just want to make it better. We just want to make it better. And it's hard to accept that you don't have all that power.
Right. And I'm just curious, in your opinion, where do these lies come from? Like, why are they so much a part of how we unconsciously operate? We're just on autopilot, assuming this is the way things are. I can fix things. I can do all these things.
I think part of it comes from the way some of us were raised, because our generation, I hope, is a lot more honest about, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't actually enjoy motherhood every single day, even though I love my kids every single day. I think we're a lot more open where we grew up, and it was we just thought our parents knew. Our parents were God and they just could figure it out. I didn't even realize my mom was struggling, to figure it out. So I think part of it is that. I think a big part of it is that when we have a child, out of everything else we have going on in our life, this is the one thing we just really want to get right, because we love our children so much. We love them so much. We put this awful, unrealistic pressure on ourselves to know things that no one has taught us to do, to know things we've never done before, to just figure it all out. And then a third aspect, which is huge, is the pressure from society. Well, a good mother is going to know how to help her child. A good mother is going to figure it out. What, are you stupid? Are you inadequate? Are you, all those thoughts start abusing us. So I think it comes from all sorts of places, but it turns into this big stew of self-abuse, I feel like.
Yeah. And when you have a child who's struggling in ways that maybe our friends' kids aren't, it's hard to not question and think, is this something I did wrong? Is this a wrong choice that we made? Like, if I had only done this, and there can be a lot of regret as well. I would say we're the kind of the wingsuit flyers of parenting, because it's a very extreme sport. And it's not something that I think a lot of parents just get if their kids aren't demanding this level of showing up for them.
I write in the book how after the police took my son away, I'm laying in bed. I can't even think straight except for one loop that's going on in my head. And it's, what did I do wrong? Was I too strict? Did I encourage him enough in his talents? Is it this? Is it that? Is it because I got divorced when he was little? I mean, just on and on. And all of a sudden that night, I said it out loud. I said, no, thank you. And it became sort of a thing that I do all the time when these abusive thoughts enter I was basically, no, thank you. I'm not picking up that baggage. I'm not picking up that suitcase. I'm not picking up that abuse. Because if I pick that up and that becomes my focus, then my focus can't be where it needs to be. If I'm too busy beating myself up, then that takes way too much energy away from where it actually needs to be. Yeah, that's very relatable. I mean, we immediately blame ourselves. And also the other part that's, I think, really abusive is we start looking around and going, why is my family struggling and they're not? And maybe even worse, that other family was struggling, but they figured it out. And their kid was okay after a few months, and it's been 5 years and my kid is still struggling. What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my family? What's wrong with my parenting? Right. And we can be so cruel to ourselves. And the sad thing is, we're the most cruel to ourselves when life is really hard. That's when we get real cruel to ourselves.
And that's when we need the most self-compassion. And I love no thank you. That's just very clear and simple. I really appreciate that. And by thinking that we could have had a different outcome if we'd made different choices is really going back to what you talked about, which is actually the second line in your book, is that I am in control, that we can control things, and we know that we can't. I would love to go into a couple of the lies, and let's take a quick break and we'll do that. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.
All right, so we can't go into all of the lies in the book, but there are a couple I wanted to dive into a little more deeply. One is the one I just mentioned, I am in control. On a personal level, that's very relatable, but that's a theme I hear from so many people, that us not being able to fix our kids is a sign that there's something wrong with us. So could you just spend a few minutes talking more about that idea of control and maybe the damage it does, and how do we reframe our brain or retrain our brain to realize that we don't actually have control over anything?
Yeah. I mean, again, I think our intentions are good, right? It all comes from a good place. We love our children so much. Of course I want to control my son not struggling. Of course I want to control, of course. But I had to, again, first, like I mentioned before, I had to realize that that is one of the cruelest things I can do, not just to him, constantly trying to control him, because then you're coming from a place of fear. You just are. But also how cruel it was to me. Because then every time something doesn't turn out the way I tried to control it, well, see, it's my fault because I should have been able to control that. the thing I came to, and it took me years, and I'm just so every listener knows, I don't have any of this mastered. I still struggle daily. But one thing I realized is that in every interaction with my child, I have to make a choice whether to control or connect. I cannot do both. I tried it. I cannot do both because control always pulls me out of range of connection. And so still to this day, my son is turning 21 this summer. And still, something will happen or I'll see his mood is different or something, and I'll freak out. And I just have to sort of stop and tell myself, okay, Kristina, you want to control the crap out of this? Which, by the way, is not going to work. The outcome is never positive. Or do you want to connect? And once I realized that slowing my breath, calming down myself before I even entered the conversation and choosing to connect, that's where we actually start to see progress. So control kept me stuck. And I think it's like anything, right? Once you start to see the results, you're more motivated. So that's what's helped me a lot, is just always reminding myself, you want to control or connect? And how did control work for you in the past? Not so great.
Yeah. And I imagine control and fear feels safe in many ways, right? So it is kind of a default for our brains. So it might feel uncomfortable then to be like, okay, I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on connection. But then, as you say, the results, you're getting a lot of evidence that it feels better for everybody and it's a lot more effective. And I just wonder do you see that as having an agenda? Is that a form of control, like going into an interaction with an agenda or with a hoped for outcome?
Oh, sure. When I operate from a place of control, which is completely fueled by my fear and anxiety, right? I become like a domineering puppeteer. I know the outcome I want. So now I'm going to try every single way to get that outcome. And again, our intentions as parents are good. They're always good, right? So we're coming from a good place. We're just so lost. And here's the other thing that I struggle with, and I think this is probably what a lot of parents feel. I felt like control was sort of a sign to myself that I care and I'm trying and I'm being proactive. Now, of course, I never called it control at the time. None of us go, oh, I'm a control freak, right? We're just like, no, I'm getting stuff done. I'm making sure to check all the boxes, make sure we're doing all the right stuff. So I never thought of it as control, but it kept me believing that I am a mom who cares. And if I don't act this way, then I'm lazy, I'm passive, I don't care. What kind of a mother wouldn't try to hyper-focus and do everything to fix? So I had to accept that, no, that does not mean I'm a bad mom if I stop trying to control. It actually means I'm a healthier mom, if anything.
There's another lie that I really loved, and I would love to go into a little deeper. It's lie number 7, and it was that information leads to clarity. And that to me was so powerful. And that's not something I think a lot of us talk about. I get questions all the time. What do I do? How do I do this? What med? People want the information so that they can fix the problem. But say more about this idea, this myth that having all the information is going to lead to clarity.
My son was first diagnosed with depression and nothing was helping. And so, I went into, again, control mode. And we did every test, we did all this stuff. And I remember we got him into this program at UCLA with these, doctors who would meet with him once a week, and then they would discuss. And, it was just like this gift we were given, basically. And I was getting so much information. All of a sudden, I found out he actually also had anxiety. He had ADHD. We were told what medication would be better. All this stuff was happening. And I'm like, this is great. This is what's going to, quote unquote, heal him, right? Everything I've been hoping for him. And it didn't, because you can know everything. You can know everything, and it's not going to be that magic cure. And that's very frustrating as a parent, because it's like the more answers you get and things aren't changing, it almost in a way feels worse, because now it's like, well, what is left? What is left? I've had the best doctors diagnosing my son. What is left? And that was just another thing I had to accept, that all these things that I sort of put in my bucket of like, check, check, check. Here are the things we're going to figure out, and then everything will be great. It doesn't work that way.
Right. And even in terms of getting that information, it can be so hard to even know where to turn, who are the right people. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I know you've used different interventions. Like, how was it for you to try to navigate systems to get the support that Luca and your family needed?
I mean, it was very frustrating. I'm sure a lot of people who have kids who are struggling can relate, because sometimes you have different people telling you different things, and you have no idea who to listen to. And so you're trying a bunch of stuff. It's like you're throwing everything against the wall and waiting to see what sticks. And Here's the thing that's complicated about being a human is that every single human is completely different. And what works for one is not going to work for another, especially when it comes to anything mental health related, right? So one kind of medication or one type of therapy, even if it works great for one kid, is not going to work great for another. And then I also had, and I didn't even share this story in the book, but I had a really bad experience with a doctor once. The psychiatrist that he had been seeing had moved. We had to go to a new one. And we walk in, and within 5 minutes, literally 5 minutes, the psychiatrist is like, okay, I think you're bipolar. And he starts writing out the, prescription for medication. And I said, well, he actually went through all this intense testing and they said he's not bipolar. Like they actually went through everything and he's not. Well, now okay, you know what? Here's the deal. And the doctor puts the stuff down, his pen and everything down. He looks at me and he goes, listen, I know it's hard as a mother to hear this. Okay. And he just starts it was so awful, but you just need to accept it. He's bipolar. All I could think about was this was years into our journey. If I hadn't had the experience, if I hadn't had met at this point, we were like on doctor number 5 or something, 6. If my son hadn't gone through this intense testing and all these years, and I was at the beginning of my journey, I would have been like, okay, yep, that's what it is. Let's give him drugs that he doesn't even need, right? All I could think about was that mom that's so desperate to help her child and a doctor's just diagnosing within 5 minutes. So, sorry, going off on a little bit of a tangent, but go to doctors who are going to take the time. The doctors that helped my son the most took an hour, some 2 hours of talking with them alone, and then talking with us together, and then talking with me alone. If you're going to put your kid on medication, make sure that doctor really, really took the time. So anyway, there was a lot of that where parents are left sort of like, I'm not the expert. Okay, I'll just believe whatever somebody suggests. And I don't even have the perfect answer to any of that. It is so hard to figure out what to do and what is best and who to trust.
Yeah, there's no one path and who to trust. Yeah. And that's something we talk a lot about at Tilt is how important it is to find providers, therapists who respect and see our family, who we feel that we can have a voice with, who don't patronize us. Believe me, I've had those experiences as well. And, in this space specifically, having people who understand and are neurodivergent affirming, who aren't just going to pathologize everything, but really look at the nuances of who our kids are. So I appreciate that reminder. Okay, there's so much that we could go into, but I would love for you to share for listeners out there who are in it, who are just in the trenches right now, who feel hopeless, they feel defeated, they've tried everything, they're burned out, they can't access the reason. I've tried everything and nothing seems to be working, or things are moving in the wrong direction. What would you say to them? What words of hard-won wisdom or hope could you share?
I mean, the main thing I would say is just be really kind to yourself. I came up with this rule when my son was struggling. The harder the day, the kinder I have to be to myself. And when it was one of those days where I was like, oh, today's going to be really extra hard, I just made it a point to treat myself the way I would treat my bestest friend. All grace, all forgiveness, all kindness, no self-criticism. I think that's so huge. There's a lie in there in the book, and I think I mentioned it, that good parents are selfless. And I think a lot of times when our kid is struggling, all our focus goes on them and we feel guilty even taking a little time out for ourselves. And like I mentioned before, I used to think once he's happy, I'll be happy. Once he's healthy, then I'll focus on my health. Once he's enjoying life fully, I will. And I realized that's a hell of a lot of pressure to put on a person. That's not fair. And I had to not, live my life based on what was going on in his. He became the main character in all of our stories in our family. And that wasn't fair to him and it wasn't fair to us. And so I looked up the word selfless because my whole life, the women in my life, my mom, my grandmother, everybody was praised for being selfless. And I looked at the definition of selfless and it's having no concern for self. And how is a mother supposed to stay sane and be the best support system for her child if she has no concern for self? So that's the number one thing I would say is never, ever, ever feel guilty taking amazing care of the most important person in your child's life. And that's you. And that is the one thing, by the way, that's what I realized. When I have no control over anything else, right? I can't control my son's illness. I can't control what's happening in our family. There's so many things I can't control. The one thing I actually can control every single day is how I treat myself. And so I no longer feel guilty putting myself first and prioritizing myself and really taking great care of myself. And I think that's not only are you doing your kid a favor because you're giving them a healthier parent, but you're also modeling something so important to them. Because all I could think about is when my son is a dad someday and life gets hard and maybe his kid is struggling, I don't want him to go, well, my mom was just so focused on me and that's the right way to do it. And that's what I should do. I want my son to go, I saw my mom be so good and kind to herself during that time. I saw my mom take time off and go out with her girlfriends and do stuff that made her feel good. And that's what I'm going to do now. We are modeling to our children how to treat themselves. So that's the main thing I would tell every parent.
I love it. You're so speaking my language, and I'm right there with you. And we talk a lot about that on this show. So thanks for that. And I have a quick follow-up question on that. Just in thinking about your relationship with Luca, I can imagine that there must be some guilt or, complicated feelings for what you guys went through when he was younger. And I can also imagine that you were able to show up for yourself has helped to mitigate some of that. Is that the case in terms of your dynamic together?
Absolutely. I remember this one conversation where he shared something with me. This was just recently. He shared something with me and I panicked because, of course, my mind went into worst case scenario, right? And he broke down crying and he said, I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry that I put you through all of this where you constantly live in fear. I'm so sorry. And we just had this beautiful healing conversation. And my husband was there and I kept saying, Luca, I don't hold anything against you. I don't hold anything against you. And everything that we went through, everything's forgiven. It's because my son kept saying, how could you not hold the stuff I did, against me? And my husband looked at him, he said, your mom has forgiven everything, but you haven't forgiven yourself. And that was really powerful. And I had to realize also, I haven't forgiven myself. I've forgiven my son for all the stuff. I haven't forgiven myself for every mistake I made. I haven't forgiven myself for every time I made a decision that actually was harmful instead of helpful. And there's such a freedom and ease and I don't even know how to explain it. It's an amazing feeling when you just let go and accept that you're not supposed to be superhuman and you're not supposed to have all the answers, and not having all the answers doesn't make you inadequate. It doesn't make you inadequate. There's no valedictorian in adulting or parenting, and just also accepting I'm not supposed to know. I'm not supposed to know everything. It would be weird if I did. That would be weird. It would be weird if I actually had the answer to every problem. And so giving myself that permission to let go of that guilt and him learning to give himself permission to let go of guilt has been incredible for both of us individually and also our relationship.
Thank you so much. Kristina, you're doing such important work, and this book is going to heal so many people and just help so many families. So thank you. The book, listeners, is called I Can Fix This and Other Lies I Told Myself While Parenting My Struggling Child. And Kristina, where do you want people to catch up on you on social media and all the places?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, pretty much everywhere at Kristina with a K, last name Kuzmic.
Awesome. And listeners, as always, I will have links in the show notes pages for all the places. And Kristina, thank you so much. And congratulations on your brand new book. I can't wait to see what it does in the world.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with a phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at Tilt Parenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.
Hey, are you a parent of a teenager? Are you feeling overwhelmed about how to be what they need while also holding limits and boundaries that keep them safe? Are you tired of conversations that negate how messy this season of parenting is? Well, I've got you. My name is Casey O'Rourke. I am a positive discipline trainer, parent coach, and the host of the Joyful Courage podcast. Every week, I come to you with an interview digging into tough topics with experts I trust and solo shows that go deep into the personal growth and mindset needed to raise teens in a way that grows them into confident, capable young people. I am not afraid of getting real about the intersection of conscious parenting and the teen years, while also bringing in vulnerability, humor, and lightness. I'm walking the path with you and honored to serve. Listen to Joyful Courage on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you consume podcasts.